Thank you, all of the attendees, for joining us for day 2 of the Marshall Scholarship Virtual Summit. This session is our diversity panel discussing race and the Marshall Scholarship. Not a specific conversation I think we've had regarding the Marshall before, so I'm really excited that we're framing the conversation this way for the first time. I'm very thankful to our alumni panelists. So you can see them. We've got Mitch Christo, Stephanie Figgins, Sarah Mohammed, and Michaela Moore. And I do just want to start things off by acknowledging, you may have heard that Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, passed away on Friday. The UK government is officially in a period of mourning, which is both why you haven't seen any comms from us on this event this week. We've gone quiet on social media and publicly otherwise. We've canceled most of our external facing events. We decided to keep this event because of the Duke of Edinburgh's passion for and commitment to improving oneself, to a life of service, to something bigger than ourselves, and to international collaboration, which the Marshall Scholarship is that, if nothing else. So just have him in mind as we have conversations today. A little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session just for your information and to know that you can come back to it at a later date or tell all your friends about it to watch it later. And any other housekeeping? Oh, other sessions today are international relations and government application questions. So I'm going to say if you have a question specific to how do I apply or how does the application work, save it for that session. And then we're going to end the day with climate and environment. So with that, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, maybe say a bit about why they applied to be a Marshall and the impact it's had in their lives and their career. Does anyone want to start us off? Shy. I can pick on you. Go ahead.
Want me to go? I'm the old guy, so. So I became a Marshall before most of you were even thinking about being born in 1977. And I studied at Oxford. I studied law. And actually my journey was a little bit different than most because I did my undergraduate at Yale, and then I actually got into and went to Yale Law School in a PhD in history program, and then I applied for the Marshall a year and a half into my law school. And the reason I was seeing all these really smart people coming to Yale Law School who had experiences as Marshalls and Rhodes and others, including one of my good buddies who was not a Marshall or Rhodes, but studied at Cambridge. You might know the name Henry Louis Gates, who's now a significant figure in our public dialogue. At any rate, what made the biggest difference for me, I guess, as a Marshall, aside from just a phenomenal educational opportunity, was just being outside of the country and seeing, you know, race and culture and society from a different perspective. That was just incredibly invaluable. I don't know if you would get that just from a summer abroad or 1 year abroad, but that certainly mattered a lot to me. Thank you.
I'll hop in. So my name's sorry. My name is Michaela. I'm a graduate of Howard University and a 2020 Marshall Scholar. So I'm actually in London right now, getting my master's in medical anthropology this year. And I just applied for drama school to get a master's in acting for next year. So that is where I'm at in that regards. I'm very new to the Marshall experience, and it's also been a pandemic lockdown, 5-month lockdown experience for me. So there are some shifts to my experience that I can't speak to, but what I will say is that I really enjoyed the freedom that you have as a Marshall Scholar to explore outside of the classroom and kind of build your community. I've built like a community of people from the UK, other Americans that are here, people from throughout Europe. I've met a lot of activists here who were responsible for organizing like Black Lives Matter protests last year and being able to get involved in a lot of the work that's going on now, politically and socially. And so I think, you know, as it regards to that experience, in being a Black woman here, that has been like one of my biggest benefits. That is kind of indirect. It came more so through the privilege of being a Marshall Scholar, being here, being able to make those connections, more so than it did like the commission per se. But we'll get into like all that good stuff later.
I can go next. Hi, y'all. My name is Stephanie, and I am Peruvian American. My mom is a migrant from Peru. My dad is American, and I was a 2013 Marshall Scholar, and I studied at Goldsmiths, which is in South London, and I did post-colonial studies, and I also studied documentary filmmaking, which is something that I never thought I would have the opportunity to do in my life. It's actually not what I applied to do with my Marshall Scholarship, but I was able to shift my program halfway through, and I think the Marshall is amazing in giving you this incredible financial stability to be able to really explore who you are and what you want to do. And I think, you know, for a lot of folks, sometimes if you come from a migrant background or a working class background, you feel this pressure to go into these high money making professions. And so the fact that I could study film in London is something that I never thought was possible for me or anyone in my family. So I felt really blessed to be able to do that. And I really agree with what Mitchell and Michaela said. I think I was in London for both years, and it was just incredible to understand race, culture, history, colonialism from this vantage point of being in South London, which is just dripping in colonial legacy. And I understood imperialism, I think, in a way that I didn't have access to before. And I was also very active with in activism and in politics when I was there. Like Michaela said, I was, everything from, you know, talking about police brutality, and thinking about how Americans were in conversation with British folks around police brutality, to like Sisters Uncut, talking about domestic violence services and feminism in London. And I think it really added so much to my studies to be able to experience activist life in London.
Guess that leaves me. Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Mohammed. I was a 2015 Marshall Scholar, and I studied at Oxford for 2 years. I did a master's in Middle Eastern Studies. I'm a graduate of UC Berkeley, so public university background, and my parents are both Egyptian immigrants, which it's funny to have started with Stephanie right before me, because I was just thinking, one of the things I thought was so fascinating the entire time I was in England is that I was studying the Middle East in the country in the world that had just the greatest hand in shaping the politics of the Middle East today, along with other countries, of course. But I think that part of that was intimidating to me, but part of that was really exciting to me, that I was in a center of learning where I could really understand colonialism. And I think that that comes with a heavy burden, but I think it was an incredible privilege to be in these spaces asking questions about shaping the politics and the policy of our world today, and having access to people and information and scholars from around the world coming to these places, still working on these issues. And it would be silly to think that the UK and the US aren't important any longer in these regions. So that's just something that Stephanie made me think about just now. But the Marshall, Hillary asked us to tell the impact the Marshalls had on our lives, and I think it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, I'm only a few years out now, and I think that the Marshall helped me start to figure out what I want to do with my life. It also completely opened my world. I had never lived outside the United States, and I think that it's really valuable, as Mitch said, to learn about life outside of your bubble and look back at the United States with fresh eyes by engaging with it through the way that the Brits engage with it, but also through the way that all of the people that you'll meet in the UK engage with the US. So those are just some of the things that I can think of in terms of impact, but I'm excited to hear what else you have for us.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we're all excited to continue hearing from all of you. Obviously, having a conversation about race is a big prompt. So I'm going to try and frame this in a way that hopefully isn't too prescriptive. I want you all to speak to your experience in a way that's authentic, but feels right for talking about the Marshall as well and the role we have in it because of that scholarship. But I'm going to start with something a little bit more broad and maybe something that applicants are concerned about. Do you feel racial difference in the UK is comparable or different to the US? For anyone?
Maybe Michaela, since you're there now, you might want
to. Yeah. So sorry, I'm just thinking about where to start. I'm not gonna, racism exists everywhere, right? And we also have to understand that the UK, Britain as an empire, was the root, the definer, and the spreader of that racism kind of globally. And so that's something that I acknowledge, that a lot of my peers acknowledge and have felt here. What I felt here is that there's almost a glaze over the racism that happens, where it's we're not as bad as the US though. At least nobody's getting shot by the police here. We're not racist here kind of air, or things that I've heard in classrooms, or things that I've heard amongst my peers or my Black British peers who have described their experience trying to combat racism when it constantly is announced as something that isn't existing here. And I think most recently, you can kind of use the Meghan Markle thing as an example of how it'll be a perverse, microaggressive, oppressive kind of experience sometimes for Black individuals here, but then systemically, they put out a report that says there's no systemic racism in the UK. And so there's that constant battle. And so, yes, I say that to say that coming to the UK is not going to escape you from racism or experiences, particularly I can only speak as a Black woman, but also from other backgrounds. But I think that's something that we're seeing across the world, unless you're going to places where you are majority. And so, yeah, that's, I would say, has been my experience. On my day-to-day, I have not experienced maybe one or two microaggressions that I can point out in my experience here, just being candid. But I've also done a very good particular job, which you get the opportunity to do as a scholar, of picking your community. So there's a very vibrant community of Marshall scholars here that I feel safe around, that I feel supported and encouraged around. And then I've been able to also find individuals from the UK and from here who have cultivated safe spaces as well, and that you get to enter into that. And so there, while the harm is everywhere, there's also a lot of safe havens, a lot of people doing a lot of good work and good fight, and then a lot of community that you can find as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? And don't feel like you have to speak to today. If you want to just speak to when you were there, I think it's good to have that perspective of progress over time.
If I can jump in, I mean, you're going to, first of all, I think perhaps even more than racism, although it's there, is really classism. I mean, I think the British culture is really a culture of stratification based on class. And I remember at the Oxford Union, which is the debating club, comment that was made by one of the white Brits about to a African brother referencing intelligence, and the African brother, kind of in a very clipped British accent, said, you know, if you were in my country, I wouldn't even let you work on my plantation, Mom. You know, and it was like, okay, serious slapdown, but it was like, where's that coming from, right? I mean, you got people from around the world who are incredibly wealthy of all kind of backgrounds. I mean, and you know, and wealth is just one, you know, layer of stratification. So what I've found, I guess, at Oxford is that you know, Oxford is virtually, well, the British universities are virtually public schools in part now, because there's a lot of people who are from backgrounds that were not of the manner born, and they're grappling with class issues as well, like how to fit in. One of my white British friends, when he picked up the phone, he would put on a clipped British accent, but that wasn't really his natural accent. It was just kind of expected of him, so to speak. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on in that regard. And then back when I was there, and I don't think it's gone away, I mean, you know, you do have domestic terror. I mean, you have, at that time, with skinheads. I mean, you know, that's not, I mean, you know, England is not, you know, what's the word for it? You know, Great Britain is not immune from what we see in this country in terms of domestic terror. You know, you go through Europe, I mean, you know, Poland, other parts of Europe where you kind of like shocked. I mean, you know, the Poles were discriminated against and victimized, and at the same time, I mean, there's, you know, kind of this, what I would call the skinhead, you know, white supremacy groups in Poland. So, you know, so yeah, I mean, there's some of the same things going on with a different kind of nuance to it, I guess. And not to be negative about it, I mean, it's an incredible opportunity. I mean, I felt safer there than I, you know, would feel today in some parts of the States in terms of your personal safety. But it's still, you know, we live in a bubble. I mean, if you're at Oxford, you're at, you know, some of these places, you're protected in lots of ways, and so it's not really a true picture, I think, of what, you know, a Black Brit or a Black person in Britain would normally experience.
Anyone else? You don't have to, just opening the opportunity. All right, I'm gonna kind of tease that out a little bit. Did your perception of the UK's attitudes towards race, coming from the US, and you hadn't been there yet, or what you perceived the Marshall Scholarship's take on race to be, whatever it may have been in whatever way you felt it was visible, factor into your decision to apply or how you approached your application?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? Just that, how did our idea of what we would be getting into with race?
How did your perception of like UK attitudes regarding race, or the Marshall Scholarship's attitudes regarding race, kind of factor into your approach to applying?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll jump in for a sec. So, I mean, look, this is a tremendous resource for anybody who can get one of these scholarships. And it's a very, I guess I would call it very dignified, and I'll give you a comparison to the Rhodes and the Rhodes Scholarship in a minute. I mean, the Marshall Scholarship is in commemoration of the Marshall Plan, which is basically the US, if you want to call it in today's world, bailout of Europe, including Great Britain after World War II. So it's a very, the Marshall Plan was very noble. The fact that the British you know, celebrate and commemorate and give back is very noble. You know, the Rhodes Scholarship, by comparison, is named after Cecil Rhodes, who helped, you know, developed the country which we once known as Rhodesia, named after him. You know, so not as what's the word for it, enlightening compared to what the Marshall. So I saw it, you know, as a tremendous big thank you to America of all backgrounds. You know, the British, you know, I mean, they could be doing a lot of other things with this money, but for them to basically say to Americans, hey, come, you know, open arms to any of our universities, with full pay, with full tuition and stipend, to me, regardless of race, says volumes. And I'm incredibly thankful, and that's why I'm here to kind of give back to others who might be interested in getting this incredible opportunity.
Oh, sorry, you go, Michaela.
No, I've been talking so much. I was just going to fill the space. Go, please.
Yeah, I wouldn't say race factored into my decision to apply. And, I'm obviously a very white passing person, but my year of the Marshall Scholarship 2013, I was the only woman of mixed background. There was no women of color my year, which is why I'm like one of the representatives from my year, even though I'm very white passing. And so I think that although it wasn't part of my factor in applying, I'm really glad that this conversation in this panel is happening more, because I think it's also happening off of the backs of many Marshalls who have been doing a lot of advocacy internally in the scholarship for many, many years. And so kudos to all of them. And yeah, just to kind of repeat what Michaela had mentioned before, I do think that there's an incredible denial of racism in the UK, that at least in the United States, we kind of are forced to look into that mirror. And I think in the UK, often people aren't even looking into that mirror. Yeah, definitely what Mitchell said also, just being confronted with, oh wow, that's a literal Nazi who lives on in my apartment block in Hackney in North London. Like, I'd never seen anyone before I went to the UK with literal like swastika tattoos and like SS like tattooed on his forehead before. And I was like, oh my God, this is just here and it's present, and people just kind of act like nothing's happening. But I think one of the amazing opportunities of being in London is being able to engage with the incredible body of post-colonial knowledge that has been produced by Black folks of Caribbean origin from all over the continent. And it was incredible to be able to engage with that scholarship. Shout out to Stuart Hall. If y'all haven't heard of Stuart Hall, I would really recommend that you look him up. If you haven't heard of Black Audio Film Collective, I would look up Black Audio Film Collective, who in the 80s were doing such amazing cultural production for Channel 4. And I would also look up the United Friends and Family campaign, which is a group of families who have had their loved ones killed by the police in London. And I think kind of putting all these things in conversation with each other, kind of the post-colonial scholarship, the cultural production, and the activism really helps to understand like what a well of resistance is happening in the UK. That's so beautiful. And if there's any like Latinx people on the call, I also want to add that I didn't understand that I mean, a lot of folks are like, wait, are there Latinos in London? And yeah, there are Latinos in London. There's an amazing group called the London Latinx, if anyone wants to look them up. And they do a lot of activism against gentrification in Brixton, which is an amazing neighborhood in South London that has been a horrible victim of gentrification and ethnic cleansing, basically. But yeah, so there's just so many vibrant communities. So I'm not sure that necessarily answers your question, but those are some thoughts on race and the Marshall Scholarship in England. So.
No, very valuable. Very happy to definitely have those resources. And I think especially for people considering studying in London, it's good to know that that community is there. Sorry, Sarah, did you want to add anything? I don't want to cut you off.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you asked us if it figured into our application, and I think that one thing, as I'm sure many of you are considering preparing your applications right now, or you're writing your essays, is that it was really important to me to be true to myself, and to the extent that my identity figured into the fact that I wanted to study the politics of the region that my family came from, I was really open about that and I spoke about it. And one thing that I noted in a prior panel that I participated in is that you don't have to do this, but if identity is important to you and you want to bring it up, then do that, be true to yourself, and then be prepared to speak about it in your Marshall interview, because you'll be asked about the things that you write about. So that's just something I would say to think about. And something that I've been reflecting on, just hearing what everyone is saying, is that I didn't so much think about this when I was applying, but when I was in the UK, and since I've come back to the US, is the fact that, the Marshall Scholarship has been changing, and the classes have gotten more and more diverse. And I think this year's class, 2021, is majority minority, is the first time they have a majority minority class. And that's incredible. And I think that it shows that there's been a lot of effort, as Stephanie was saying, both on the part of Marshalls in the community, but also the Marshall program itself, to think about what it means that they are providing this scholarship to have American students come to the UK to participate in British life, and to sort of create this ongoing relationship between the two countries. And I think it's really important that we, as diverse members, diverse citizens of the US, are a part of that relationship. And so I encourage you, I mean, if you're thinking, am I the type of person who gets to be a Marshall? The answer to that is yes, because you are exactly the type of person that should be a Marshall. So it's really something I hadn't thought about as much beforehand, but I think it's so important that we be represented in these spaces. So don't let that stop you if you are thinking, am I the type of person? Thanks, Hillary.
Yeah, just for the record, that is the overarching message I wanted to come out of this whole summit, and I promise I didn't pay her to say that. Yeah, I really want people to feel like real people are Marshalls. You should absolutely be a Marshall. All of these things make you a better candidate. They aren't challenges to being a Marshall. And I hope people come away from this feeling that way. So I'm going to throw some stats at you, not to brag about the Marshall or denigrate it, but just for us to maybe think about and talk about. As mentioned, this last cohort was the most diverse class of Marshalls ever. So 52% of the 50 scholars identified from a minority background. 68% of the scholars for 2021 were women. 10 of the 50 identify as Black, and 7 as Latino. So I'm going to put that out there and kind of frame it with what is the relationship between racial issues and higher education? What should we do? What are we doing? I'll let you kind of take it from there, but let's sit for a minute.
Now, I'm going to take a slice of it for a minute from the perspective of law studies. So I teach law school at Loyola in New Orleans. And one of the cool things about the Marshall is you can study, for example, jurisprudence or law, lots of places throughout the UK, including where I went to, which was Oxford. And if you get the traditional British law degree, which is actually an undergraduate degree, at one time, all of the law degrees and most of the law degrees around the world are actually undergraduate degrees. You get a year's credit towards your American law school, which I got a year's credit towards my Yale degree because of my Oxford degree. And also in the US, because the Oxford and Cambridge law degrees were the law degrees in the world, you can actually sit for the bar exam in about 25 states in the US, just having the Oxford or Cambridge law degree. Now that's very kind of, very pinpointed kind of, career specific, right? I mean, if you're not interested in law, then you can just ignore my comment. But I'm writing about, in addition to Black Lives Matter, which I've written a number of law review articles, I have one that I'm working on called Black Lawyers Matter. And I think that we really need to find ways of getting people of color, first generation, et cetera, through educational institutions beyond the institutional obstacles like the cost of education and the LSAT and all kind of other things that, were kind of created after we had a chance to start becoming a part of it. Wasn't there before. Even the bar exam was an anti-immigrant development in the law. I mean, when European immigrants came over, basically white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who controlled the legal community said, oh, we don't want these, Italians and Irishmen and all these other folks, Eastern Europeans to become lawyers. Let's find a way of raising the bar, which is called the bar exam. So I just think it's phenomenal for anyone who has a chance to develop, this opportunity postgraduate studies. Certainly gives you a major leg up and it helps you to continue to distinguish yourself in your academic career.
Anyone else? Or I've got more questions. Anyone in the audience feel like you can ask questions as well? Okay, well, that sets me up nicely. Don't let me interrupt you, Stephanie, Sarah, but you interrupt me if you want. So I think this came up in yesterday's diversity conversation, which was focused on women and LGBTQ+ communities and the conversation of whether those should be in the same conversation or not. But I think the whole idea of intersectionality of minorities is one we'd sort of be remiss not to consider. So like the UK recently acknowledged this we just did a report on Black female entrepreneurs and how they can gain investment both in the UK and the US and what the barriers to funding their businesses are. And it definitely was a very specific conversation about being both Black and female. And I think we've seen that with a lot of the stats coming out around unequal pay and how it's more pervasive when you are representative of more than one minority or possibly even add in ethnic identity. So given that lens, do you think that there are certain minority intersections that are useful to consider in terms of achievement, specifically in higher education? But I'm happy for you to be more widely thinking in terms of your work professionally or just how your time spent in the UK.
Yeah, I'm queer, I'm Peruvian. I sit at the intersection of a few of these things. And also until very recently, I was working at Transqueer Pueblo. I live in Phoenix, Arizona in the United States. And Transqueer Pueblo is an LGBTQ migrant of color organization. I was working there as the director of our media and culture program. And yeah, absolutely. It's super important to understand how these things all work together, right? Intersectional feminism, Black feminism. And I think it's really important to think about that when we're deciding who we want to take on board as scholars, who we want to open the doors to in our higher education institutions. And I think what is needed the most for queer people of color, for trans people of color, is to know that we are fully embraced in the institutions that we are, so we don't have to waste so much energy just to be ourselves, right? London also has just an amazing cutie poc scene. And by cutie poc, I mean queer, trans people of color. And I'm trying to think of the names of a few collectives, but now they're escaping me because I think I'm getting old now because that was in 2013 and now it's 2021. But yeah, I just met so many wonderful queer folk and trans folk in London and got to study with them and do activism with them. And that was really, really transformative. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yeah, no, and that's just part of the conversation I wanted to hopefully inspire. I don't know if anyone else has different thoughts or it just sparked something else, but.
I mean, I will say, Mitchell brought up religion in the chat, and I think something that I was surprised by in the UK, this is maybe coming back to an earlier question, is the visibility of Muslims in the UK. And I think that was just so different for me from the US. And part of it is that, like, just proportion of the population, there are more Muslims in the UK than there are in the US in relation to the rest of the population. But I do think that I was engaged in some communities there, faith communities, and getting to see the type of organizing that takes place in the US versus the UK. And these are people I'm still in contact with today. So I think that was really cool. And I think being a visibly Muslim woman in spaces in higher education is something that, I mean, it followed me in England, in the US. I'm currently doing my PhD at Harvard, and we are constantly asking these questions that Stephanie was bringing up about how do we make spaces not only bring people into these spaces that have these various identities, but open these spaces for people so that they aren't constantly battling to exist. I think that's just an important conversation that needs to be happening in all sectors, but in higher education, it tends to, that tends to be where I see it. But I don't know if that speaks to your question, Hillary, so just.
Oh no, it absolutely does. And I don't think there was a right answer or a certain thing I wanted to come out of that. And I think to Stephanie's point, just creating that environment of feeling embraced and welcome. And I think the UK government has certainly developed to a point where there's now a commitment to advocating for diversity. And their new campaign is to be a force for good, not just in the UK, not just in higher education, not just in one area, but in the world, to lead in that action, not just to speak about it. Obviously, the conversation is a great place to start.
Yeah, if I can jump in for a second.
Please do.
So clearly, yeah, diversity and inclusion, and I'm so happy to have this particular panel, but it's across the board, and I'm glad to see, you know, the British government embracing it. The intersectionality is such an important one. I think that everyone who's here interested in applying should recognize their unique qualities. We all come from, you know, a combination of backgrounds. I remember when I was applying, I mean, I'm African American from New Orleans. I was a little bit darker back when I had more sunshine before COVID. But I've gotten a little bit shades of lighter. But, you know, I come from a mixed race family that's been 200 years plus, you know, mixed race. They were all considered Black and discriminated against because of it, and everything, housing. And when I grew up, there were separate bathrooms and separate water fountains and all the other things that we now kind of see on TV, you know, kind of an apartheid system. But I remember writing my essay, and in my essay, I guess I was an early intersectionality person without knowing it, because I kind of mentioned, you know, combination of being Black and being poor and being Southern, et cetera, and that it led to certain consequences. And when I interviewed, quite frankly, I think it was with the Rhodes and not the Marshall, one of the Rhodes people took offense to my basically saying that being Southern, I'm less inclined to be informed, because as a white Southerner of high, you know, kind of rank, he was very well informed. And, you know, my answer was, yeah, you know, that's your background, and that's, you know, your reality. But my reality is, you know, in combination of being Black and poor and Southern, that you know, that information did not necessarily flow to me. I didn't have the access that he might have had to travel and to other things. And so, you know, be yourself, I guess, is the point. I mean, you're very unique, and I think to the extent that you want to share your uniqueness, I think that you will stand out in the applicant pool. I mean, if the British government wanted to pick, you know, all white males, you know, with 4.0 averages from Ivy League schools, they can do that. That's not what they're doing. Okay, so here's the opportunity for you to be yourself. If you want to share who you are, it will be distinguishing. And I think you'll be more likely to be chosen than if you try to effectively pass for something that you're not. By the way, I'm also Catholic, so that was another strike at that time.
That's great. Yeah, and hopefully what comes of this is that nothing about you is a strike against you, hopefully, now in the Marshall application process. And I would hope that people feel that way. I don't know. I don't want to speak to whether or not you guys felt that way in your application process and or interview process. Please mention if not. This isn't, I want it to be an honest conversation. So do feel free to bring that up. We are coming towards the end of our session. So I kind of just wanted to open it up to, is there a message you want to kind of put out there for applicants, I guess particularly applicants of color, that you want them to hear from an alumni as they kind of approach trying to become a marshal?
Yeah.
Yes, you need a 3.7 GPA. Sorry, just gonna, or higher.
Yeah, I would just say apply, and I would say remember that all of us have imposter syndrome. I would say that all of us, or most of us, I would say definitely me, thought that it probably isn't even worth it to apply because I'm not going to get it. And I think just try it out. Remember that a lot of us, including me, have applied for many scholarships and been denied and then got the Marshall, or a lot of folks got the Marshall on their second attempt. And I would also say seek support, because I think white supremacy functions in a way is in that it creates unceasing fountains of support for certain kinds of bodies. And then there's just no support for the rest of people. And so get the support where you can. I lived in my scholarship office when I was applying for the Marshall scholarship. And I got a lot of support with my essays. I got a lot of support with mock interviews and talks. And so don't forget that's there. If you don't have that at that university, reach out to us. We're here because we want to see you succeed against your wildest expectations of what you think you could have done in your life. So reach out to us and we can help you. And there, I don't know what the email is too. I think it's outreach@marshallscholarships.org or
.org. Yeah.
.org, if someone can drop that in the chat maybe. So if you email them, then they'll reach out to us and we can provide mentorship to y'all in a bit of direction. So please do that because you deserve that.
I guess I can jump in. I sort of already gave my message that was not sponsored by the British consulate, I promise. But that is all to say, I agree with everything Stephanie said. Lean on others to read, get second opinions. Scholarships offices help a lot more than I ever thought they could. I didn't know that there was a person who worked at my university whose job it was to help students apply to scholarships. And I think that if you don't already know who that person is, right after this call, Google them at your university and reach out and introduce yourself. So that's one key takeaway. Another thing is just know that there are, the fact that this set of panels is happening is because there are so many people within the Marshall organization and alumni who want you to be a part of this. And we want you to get the scholarship too and have these doors open for you. And so please do reach out to us. And something else is that if you don't end up getting the Marshall, say you apply, say this doesn't work out, first of all, apply again if you're still eligible. And second of all, don't let that stop you. I think I learned so much about myself from preparing my application for the Marshall Scholarship. I was telling someone recently, it has been many years since I wrote those applications in 2014. And sometimes I still go back to my essays because I feel like they were some of the most powerful statements I made about myself and my goals and who I felt like I was. And it can be hard to, put in the effort to write a good application, and then it will pay dividends for you regardless of whether or not you end up in this scholarship or something else. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So my message really reflects both Stephanie and Sarah's comment, and in that there was a remark made to me by one of my Oxford tutors that I want to share with you because I didn't know how to take it when it happened. So one of my tutors said to me, "Crusto, be resourceful." And I'm saying to myself, am I supposed to hit this white man in the face for like telling me I'm not resourceful. If he knew that I came from an impoverished community in New Orleans, first generation X, Y, and Z, and I'm here at Oxford University on a Marshall Scholarship, I mean, how much more resourceful do I need to be? And I don't even recall the reference that he was making, but I would imagine, and I've used this several times, many times to my students, which is you can't be too resourceful. You know, if you want to do a spiritual thing, you know, God has given us tremendous resources. And somehow those resources don't necessarily trickle down to people of color, people of different backgrounds, right? And you should not kind of take that status quo. So if your school doesn't have the resources, as Stephanie mentioned, where are your resources? If you're doubtful, I mean, I put my email address in the chat, you know, contact us. We're all here for you, okay? And don't let anything stop you. I can't imagine that you would, because you wouldn't be here in this discussion if you were not the kind of person who would take on the challenges. I remember the night that I didn't get the roads, and it was the only thing I hadn't really gotten in my life in the competition. And my brother laughed at me. He said, "Look, let's go out for a drink. You got to be kidding me. You didn't get the roads? You know, who cares?" Right? And I'm like, I care because I didn't get it. And especially because I got in Louisiana and I didn't get the final one. And then, like, you know, 3 weeks later, I got the Marshall. And I'm like, thank God I didn't get the roads, because the Marshall was, you know, tremendously better. So the point is that there are lots of different opportunities. The Marshall is one of them. Please, please, please apply. Give yourself the opportunity to have this enriching opportunity that we've all shared, and also to be part of a community, because, you know, we're all part of this, you know, alumni of Marshalls at this point in time, in our relationship with the British government and our status in the U.S. Country as well, and in academia. So take advantage of it. Don't be afraid of it. And if you need any help, reach out to us. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, all of you, for being on this panel. I personally really appreciate it, and I think a lot of people who are considering applying will really appreciate it. For Sophia's question, just for eligibility, you can have graduated anytime since April 2019, and up to, if you be graduating by June of 2022, double check the website for that. But essentially you can have already graduated and still apply to the Marshall, and you can apply if you are currently a junior. Great. For more application questions, that session starts in just over an hour. Please join us in 11 minutes for the International Relations and Government session, which should also be fantastic. Thank you again for everyone who decided this was worth their time. I really appreciate it. Any other questions? And you can find us throughout the day. All of the links to sessions are on Twitter. Just scroll down a little bit. Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.